Now we're going to look at the population patterns regarding settlement for Middle America, beginning with Central America and then working our way over to the Caribbean. First off, we look at Central America compared to the Caribbean. Central America is more rural. You definitely see more of the grays and the light greens in the map, which we associate with more sparsely populated areas, whereas those purple, maroon, dark red are areas where we see high population density or clusters of population, clusters of settlement. So in the case of Mexico, what we see there is, for the most part, the northern part of the country, including the Baja Peninsula, are sparsely populated, with some exceptions there. But in the southern part, much more densely populated. There we see purples, dark reds, kind of clustered throughout much of the southern part of Mexico. Here is very upland area. So once again, this is going to come back to altitudinal zonation. We're going to see this in Central America especially, which is why I wanted to explain it, is because we can see these patterns in which it's not right there on a coastline like we might expect, like we've maybe seen in other parts of the world, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, all those port cities. In the case here, we see a lot of the urban areas or clusters of population are farther inland. What's going on there? Once again, higher elevations, a little bit better in terms of temperate, but also agriculture is the key to understanding the origins for the settlement. Then over time, the cities grow and grow and grow. In the case of the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, it's very sparsely populated. Why? Well, let's go ahead and look at a map. If we look at why, this part of the Yucatan Peninsula, it's very dark green here. So this is tropical rainforest. Just like the Amazon lowlands in South America isn't really conducive to agriculture, the same goes here. And so agriculture, you're not going to see a lot of, robust agriculture in a rainforest. It's pretty much tropical stuff, tropical plants, tropical fruits are going to be the kind of stuff you see grown there. All right, well, let's go a little bit more in depth here into the individual countries. And so let's go back to the population density map. We can see in the case of these countries right along here, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, you're going to see the pattern is which the populations were clustered along the western side. And once again, what's along the western side? There we're going to find upland areas. And so it's a little bit flatter, a little bit more like we saw earlier with the Yucatan Peninsula, a little bit more of a tropical rainforest, not desirable locations for settlement or agriculture, but on the other side, in these upland areas, you're going to find that perfect location for agriculture, in which we also see large settlements. We go then over to Nicaragua. Let's look at Nicaragua. First off, we can see that mountain chain coming right through here. Let me go ahead and go to the terrain. We can see this mountain chain that comes right through Guatemala, and this is where we're going to see a large population. Notice we don't see a lot of people living over here on this coast. It's too darn hot and muggy. It's not really conducive to human civilization. We go to El Salvador. Very rugged, however, throughout much of El Salvador. You're going to find cities all over the place. In each of these individual little cities and pockets, you do find a lot of villages, a lot of small cities. And so we go back to the population density map. Wow, look at El Salvador. It's pretty much from border to border, with its core area being right dead smack in the center of the country. Another kind of theme we're going to see in Central America is these core countries more in the center. I've already mentioned that in the case of Mexico City, but we're going to see it in other places, El Salvador and Costa Rica, for example. And now we zoom out. Let's go back to the Earth view. We come over here, El Salvador rugged, Honduras rugged, but we get over here a little bit more of what we would think of as rainforest. Not as much, urban areas, not much settlement in this part of eastern Honduras and in eastern Nicaragua, which we go back to the population density map, and that makes sense. Now, in the case of Costa Rica, it's a little bit higher population density. It's a little bit more spread out, but we do definitely see once again that core central area. In the case of Costa Rica, that is San Jose. So Costa Rica population is a little bit more dense, a little bit more concentrated throughout or maybe we'll say dispersed would be better, but we do see that core area. And with Panama, it continues on the western edge. We see more of a population cluster, but we also see a dense cluster right there through the middle of Panama, and that makes sense. So once again, there's where we see large population in this part of Panama. It's also kind of, we can see that. It's not as dark green. We've got the mountain coming right through here, so maybe a little bit of orographic precipitation happening there. So you might get a little bit of a relief from all that rain. That might be why. It is why. So what we got going on also is the dense key primate city of Panama, the core capital, Panama City, and its very important Panama Canal, which goes right through the middle of it. Let's go ahead and zoom back out. Now we're going to look at Belize. Belize is, kind of Caribbean, kind of Central American. It's definitely a part. It's attached to the Central American land bridge, but it has a lot of characteristics that some say it's Caribbean. But it is, of all of these parts of Middle America, that isn't just a remote island that nobody lives on. It is the least populated area, least population density. So very spread out. Now it's fast growing, so this might be changing, but it doesn't have a lot of people per square mile. So it's very agricultural. This is Belize is formerly known as British Honduras, so you can kind of see its colonial legacy there and its straight lines that separate it from Guatemala. Now with Caribbean, we've got Cuba. Cuba, very dense population. It's kind of these different urban areas scattered throughout much of the island, and that's going to be something we're going to see in a lot of these other bigger, greater Antilles islands. It's kind of these cities, but really the islands have high population density because the urban areas are scattered throughout the islands. So anywhere where people can live, they're going to live in the Caribbean, in Central America too. So that whole altitudinal zonation continues on. So we can see these urban areas scattered throughout Cuba, which now Americans will be able to go to more and more. In Jamaica, man. So we've got Kingston, the big core capital. But we also have urban areas kind of scattered throughout on its peripheral edges. In the case of Hispaniola, we've got the Dominican Republic on one side, Haiti on the other, and right through the middle of it, you can actually see the different land use. This is the border that separates on one side Dominican Republic. A little bit more vegetation, a little bit more lush, and over here a little bit drier. So there is a little bit of orographic precipitation going on there, but it's also land use, more land use on the Haitian side. It makes sense to do have a little bit higher population density. But when we go over to Puerto Rico, very high population density. So we do see a lot of green on the map, but here it's not as rugged. It's not going to be a huge mountain, that it's going to dominate the island like we're just going to see with the Lesser Antilles Islands. But it's a very, very dense population. I mean, you got these cities scattered throughout all over the island of Puerto Rico. We go to the Virgin Islands, very small, very fragile. Up here we got Turks and Caicos. This is very sparsely populated. I mean, you can barely live on these islands that are essentially built on coral. These aren't really so much from plate tectonics per se. They're actually built on little pieces of coral over time that's built up. Same with the Bahamas. So very, very, very fragile, very low lying, not much in terms of where people can live. Continue on over here, some other interesting places. We've got this right here is the most dense of the islands, and that's the island of St. Martin, which is divided into two halves. It's got the French part on the north, and then the Dutch part on the south. And we can kind of see these urban areas. Anywhere where you can see, other than green, we're going to see dense population. These are essentially Dutch and French getaways. So these are going to be very, very high incomes oftentimes, and so pretty much anywhere where people can, besides this very, very steep slopes, people are going to live. Other than that, we don't have a lot of interesting things. Oh yeah, we do. We've got the island of Montserrat. So Montserrat has a lowering population density as the population leaves more and more over time. Why are they leaving? Because a volcano blew up in 1995 and causing 2/3 of the population to have to scatter. So here's the volcano. It's this sucker right there. There's the observatory of Plymouth. I mean, so there it is. My fault. There's the volcano. So there it is. You can see that's ash kind of just coming over and covering. And so Plymouth, the big urban area where people did live, is now essentially covered. It's forced people to leave. And so you have forced migration happening here, no doubt. So, once again, these are things that no one really talks about, but very much in these areas that have violent physical environments, well, these violent physical environments can trigger mass migrations and forced migrations from these natural hazards. Continuing on around, we've got these other Antille Islands, and so once again, some of them are high islands, some of them are low islands. So typically the high islands are going to see a little bit more people, like Martinique. We see Martinique, dense population right through there, but also these other islands, further over, we've got the popular tourist destinations, Aruba, Curacao. These are areas that are also highly dense, and kind of tourism is one reason why, but anywhere where people can live, they're going to live. Not too much of a mountainous feature here. It's a very, very, very dense population throughout much of the island.